I knew living in an HOA community came with its fair share of headaches, but I never thought I'd be fighting for my own lawn. Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside with a cup of coffee, and finding a stranger's car parked right in the middle of your front yard. No note, no explanation, just a car sitting there like it owned the place. And when I went to the HOA for help, well, let's just say they picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a delivery driver got lost, or someone had an emergency and had to leave their car there. But as the hours passed and the car remained, I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. By the evening, I was annoyed. By the next morning, I was furious. I knocked on a few doors, asking if anyone knew whose car it was. No luck. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I called the HOA. After all, isn't that what HOAs are supposed to be for? Keeping the neighborhood in order, making sure everyone follows the rules. I explained the situation to Linda, the HOA president, expecting her to be as frustrated as I was. Instead, she sighed dramatically and said, "Oh, that's just Greg's car. He needed a place to park for a few days." Excuse me? Greg? My neighbor from 2 houses down? The guy who had a perfectly good driveway but, for some reason, decided my lawn was a better parking spot? I told Linda that Greg needed to move his car immediately. Her response? "It's just temporary. Let's be neighborly, okay?" Neighborly? Since when does being neighborly mean letting someone turn your yard into their personal parking lot? I reminded her that HOA rules specifically state that all vehicles must be parked in driveways or designated spots, not on someone else's grass. She shrugged it off, saying that as HOA president, she had the authority to make special accommodations. I was boiling, so I went straight to Greg's house. He answered the door with a smug grin, acting like this was no big deal. "Oh yeah, Linda said it was fine. My driveway's full, and I didn't feel like parking on the street." I stared at him, waiting for some kind of punchline. Nothing. He really thought this was okay. I told him to move his car immediately, but he just waved me off. "I'll get to it later," he said, then shut the door in my face. That was it. No more asking nicely. No more playing by their ridiculous HOA politics. If Linda and Greg wanted to act like the rules didn't apply to them, I'd remind them exactly why they existed in the first place. But first, let me ask you, what would you do in my situation? Would you let some entitled neighbor treat your lawn like a free parking space? Or would you do exactly what I was about to do and make sure they regretted ever messing with me? I knew being nice wasn't going to get me anywhere, so I decided to fight fire with fire. Since Greg and Linda wanted to ignore the rules, I figured I'd use those same rules against them. I grabbed my HOA handbook, the one they loved to enforce when it suited them, and started flipping through the pages. And there it was, clear as day. No overnight street parking, no blocking driveways, and most importantly, no parking on lawns. Violators were subject to fines and towing at the owner's expense. Perfect. I snapped pictures of Greg's car sitting right there on my grass and emailed them to the HOA board. But knowing Linda, she'd probably ignore them. So I took it one step further. I called the city's parking enforcement hotline and reported an abandoned vehicle on private property. The officer on the phone was more than happy to help. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to complain about Greg's parking habits. The next morning, I woke up early and made myself a cup of coffee, sitting by the window, waiting. Right. On time, a tow truck pulled up in front of my house. The driver got out, took one look at the car, and nodded. "This the one?" I grinned. "Yep." He went straight to work, attaching chains to Greg's car, while I casually stepped onto my porch, pretending to enjoy the morning air. A few minutes later, I heard Greg's front door swing open. At first, he didn't notice, but the second he saw the tow truck lifting his car off my lawn, he sprinted across the grass like his life depended on it. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? The tow truck driver barely looked at him. Removing an illegally parked vehicle, sir. Greg turned to me, eyes wild with anger. You called a tow truck? I took a slow sip of my coffee and shrugged. HOA rules. No parking on lawns. I thought you'd appreciate me enforcing them. He looked like he was about to explode. You could have just told me. I raised an eyebrow. I did. You said you'd get to it later. Guess later came sooner than you expected. By then, Linda had stormed over, demanding the truck stop. The driver just handed her a copy of the city's parking ordinance. She turned red, knowing she couldn't argue against it. Greg had to pay nearly $300 to get his car back. And Linda? She was fuming. But there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. Now let me ask you, was I wrong for doing this? Or did Greg and Linda get exactly what they deserved? I thought that would be the end of it. Greg got his car towed, Linda got embarrassed, and I figured they'd finally leave me alone. But no, these two were too petty for that. A couple of days later, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA. At first, I thought it was an apology. Yeah, right. But when I opened it, my blood boiled. It was a violation notice for damaging community aesthetics. They had the audacity to fine me $100 because my lawn had tire marks. The same tire marks Greg's car had left. I stormed over to Linda's house, letter in hand. She opened the door with a fake smile, clearly expecting me. Oh, I see you got the notice. It's important we maintain the neighborhood's appearance, don't you think? I could tell she was loving this. She thought she had won, but what she didn't know was I had already started digging into her little HOA empire. See, while waiting for the tow truck that day, I got curious. I looked up the HOA's financials, meeting minutes, and board policies. And what I found? Oh, it was juicy. Linda had been running the HOA like her own personal kingdom. She ignored complaints, approved special privileges for her friends, like Greg, and even used HOA funds for personal expenses. There were reports of missing money, unauthorized charges, and even a $5,000 maintenance fee that had no documentation. I wasn't just dealing with an annoying HOA president. I was dealing with a fraudulent one. I went straight to the other board members, showing them everything I had found. Most of them were just as fed up with Linda as I was, but they were afraid to speak up. That's when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was time to take Linda down. I sent an anonymous tip to the state's HOA regulatory board, outlining every suspicious transaction I had uncovered. I also compiled the evidence and sent it to the local news, labeling it HOA President Caught in Corruption Scandal. But before I pulled the trigger on my final move, I wanted to see how far Linda would go. So, I requested a formal appeal for my violation. When she called a board meeting to address it, I knew that was my moment to strike. So, tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you stop here and take the $100 fine? Or would you go all in and make sure Linda never messed with another homeowner? Again? The board meeting was held at the community clubhouse, and let me tell you, I came prepared. I walked in with a folder full of documents, emails, and financial records. The other homeowners were already seated, most of them just expecting another boring HOA meeting. Oh, they had no idea what was coming. Linda sat at the front like a queen on her throne, with Greg smirking beside her. All right, she said, flipping through her papers. Let's discuss the matter of the violation fine issued to— Actually, I interrupted, standing up. Before we get to that, I think we should talk about something much bigger. That got everyone's attention. I pulled out my first document. Did you all know that the HOA has been missing thousands of dollars in unexplained expenses? Murmurs spread through the room. Linda's face twitched, but she kept her fake composure. That's ridiculous. I held up another paper. Then maybe you can explain why $5,000 was withdrawn last year under maintenance, but no maintenance work was ever done? Or why Greg here gets to park wherever he wants, while others get fined? Greg's smirk disappeared real fast. I don't know what you're talking about, Linda snapped. Oh, really? Because I have emails showing you personally approving exceptions for your friends while ignoring complaints from other homeowners. The board members started shifting uncomfortably. Some of them looked at Linda, waiting for an explanation. She stammered, trying to come up with something. But I wasn't done. And the best part? I leaned forward. The state HOA regulatory board now has all of this information. Oh, and so does the local news. Silence. Absolute silence. Then, chaos. The homeowners erupted in anger, demanding answers. The board members who had been too scared to speak up before suddenly found their voices. One of them, an older gentleman named Tom, stood up. I move for an immediate vote to remove Linda as HOA president. Linda's eyes widened in panic. You can't do that. Actually, another board member said, flipping through the HOA handbook, we can, and we will. A vote was held right then and there, and Linda was voted out on the spot. Greg tried to defend her, but no one cared what he had to say anymore. Then came the best part. The HOA announced they'd be filing an official complaint against Linda, and since fraud was involved, there was a chance she'd be facing legal consequences. I stood back, watching as Linda's world fell apart. So, what do you think? Did she deserve it? Or should I have gone even further? With Linda officially out as HOA president and facing serious trouble, things in the neighborhood started changing fast. The new board members wasted no time fixing the mess she left behind. They reversed unfair fines, enforced rules fairly, and, best of all, put an end to the special treatment Linda used to give her little group of friends. And Greg, well, let's just say, karma came knocking real quick. See, when I was digging through HOA records, I found something interesting. Greg had been behind on his HOA dues for months. Linda had been covering for him, waiving his late fees and keeping it off the books. But now that she was gone, the new board sent Greg a notice of overdue payments, demanding thousands of dollars in back dues and fines. Greg tried to fight it, but this time, no one was on his side. If he didn't pay, the HOA had the right to place a lien on his house. He went from acting like the king of the neighborhood to a desperate man scrambling for cash. And Linda? Oh, she had bigger problems. Turns out, the state HOA regulatory board didn't take kindly to her little financial schemes. An official investigation was launched, and she was forced to hand over all HOA records. It didn't take long for them to find clear evidence of fraud, misappropriation of funds, unauthorized transactions, and straight-up theft. The final blow came when the local news picked up the story. One day, I turned on the TV and saw her, face on the screen, caught in the middle of a full-blown HOA corruption scandal. She lost her job, her reputation, and, as icing on the cake, was hit with a massive lawsuit from the homeowners. I could have stopped there. I could have sat back and enjoyed the downfall. But there was one last thing I had to do. Remember that $100 fine she tried to slap on me? The one for the tire marks her buddy Greg left on my lawn? Well, once the new HOA board took over, they not only canceled my fine, they sent me a formal apology. But I wasn't done. I took Greg to small claims court for property damage, and guess what? I won. Greg had to cough up $500 for lawn repairs. The best part? I used that money to hire a landscaping crew to redo my front yard, and made sure to send him a picture of the finished result. So in the end, I got justice. The HOA became a real community again. Linda got what she deserved. And Greg? Well, he doesn't park on my lawn anymore. Now tell me, was that the most satisfying revenge you've ever heard? Or should I have gone even further?